recording, which I've just been given permission to do.
Mm.
Uh-oh, now let me see. I don't know where that's going though. Well, it's just whatever default setting. Okay, well, it's fine. And yeah, maybe we'll wait like 2 minutes just to see if someone else shows. And I'm just orienting my windows here.
No worries. I'm totally, I'm present, and I'm also just finishing up editing my blog post on repairing the ARC38 hub, actually.
Oh, cool. This is
yeah,
great.
Excellent. Yeah, it really works into
to hear about that.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, it's a complicated thing because I have to, I realized I have to introduce myself to everybody and also explain to them why I am their reluctant board president, and, you know, how that relates to a regenerative experience for all.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so working on the right to repair as a sort of cultural requirement. There we go.
Wow. Cool. Well, you could perhaps elaborate on that. I mean, this is being recorded for the record. So I guess we're officially starting. It's sort of 3 minutes into the time, and there was some confusion. A word went out in different channels with a couple of different times for the session, but anyway, we're here right now. It is the 20th of December of 2018. We're still in 2018, sort of heading up just directly into the solstice. And I'm Charles Blass. I'm in Zurich, Switzerland. Called this open space, and I know there's something called open space technology, and I don't really know technically about that, but I've been part of a handful of those and have some sense of it. So we'll try to keep it loose and open. That said, this is about decentralized regenerative learning and action hubs and resources. And this topic has been coming to me more and more through my work with climate change and consciousness, ccc19.org conference at Findhorn in April next year, and also Global Network Weaving Initiative. So that's my check-in and around the space and me. Mariette, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so since we are being recorded, my name is Mariette Papik, and I work with Just One Organics, and we work in cooperation now with Holochain. And I'm also the president of the board of an organization in New York State called ARC38. And so all of my work right now is involved with regenerative culture and regenerative decentralized culture, and looking at the role of everything from gamification and to learning hubs, and really looking at how these things get created. With Just One, we're looking to create learning hubs literally directly around our processing and production campuses. And so that's a really important part of what we're doing and we're building culturally. And then with my work with ARC38, that's also been the vision, mostly to unify activist communities from New York City and integrate them with farming communities in Dutchess County, New York. And then again, you know, bridging and looking at differences or perceived differences in culture, class, tribe, etc., and looking at how regenerative principles can help bridge these sort of fixed identities so that people can sort of work through them more quickly in order to then achieve real working relationships and co-creation relationships, you know, where everyone is understood to be to have something to teach and also to have something to learn, because that's a really important part of incentivizing each one of us. You know, I think that's really the core aspect of getting past the model of education that we were given, that we know does not work and does not promote the type of decentralized community that we want, the communities that we want to create. So that's what I'm up to. Yeah, and that's what I'm writing a post about.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny because Daniel Wall, his regenerative sort of workbook, I forget, Designing Regenerative Cultures, I think is the title. And I don't have the book in front of me, but I've spent some time with it, would like to spend more with it. And I lent my copy to somebody who I thought needed it more desperately than I did at the moment. But, even that amazing workbook is not easy to penetrate for most people. And it's a really wonderful resource. But how do you make that resource into something that people can internalize? That's like a really big aspect of it. So for me, I've been looking at things that are swirling, and one of the axes or one of the sort of meaning points that I see is in demystifying technology for farmers as well as for people who just who consume food and then taking it from there.
It's quite a few people, I guess. People that consume food.
Yeah.
Kiara.
Okay.
Hi there. Welcome.
Great.
Glad to see you.
Even though I thought the time was an hour later, and on a call that we just had with Cynthia, Ben thought it was 2 hours later. So anyway.
You got it. You're here. That's great. Yeah, there was a mix-up in a few ways, but yeah. So you guys know each other also, or already?
We're getting to know each other, yeah, which has been awesome through the ecosystem mapping conversation, the holochain, right, or the born out of the holochain space. And was there a session this morning, Mariette? I don't think there was, right?
I don't think so, and I had already given my advance apologies for not attending it. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it was canceled. Christina's last week, it was already off for the holidays.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was at a 2-hour. I'll just maybe check in real quick and give a little update. So I was at a 2-hour session called Amplifying the Regenerative Movement, and it was great. It was a lot of folks attended, part of the from the Jenna Alliance, which is a group that I've been working with representing the regenerative movement in North America, building from the FIC and the Eco-Village movement and other consulting groups, and the group that I'm part of, the Village Lab. And so there's a lot that's kind of bubbling out of that field. So it was nice to overlap those. And we were working around the principle of having like three things to be able to move forward, like in 2019, how to amplify or move the regenerative movement forward. And one of the main ones that I was sharing that I think relates really at the core to this thread is around regenerative enterprise solutions, even though the word enterprise can be a little bit of a throw off for some people, but it's the idea that food, water, waste, and energy are things that are really vital to stabilize and to be able to create regenerative patterns for, and that those also relate a lot to livelihood. And so in order to help people, it's kind of a stacking of functions to help people get their livelihood more in their own hands, and then to be able to create those. And of course, in a socio-ecological context, bioregionally, which is, there's a lot of different layers to why, like how that would happen in a good way, or how that could go wrong if someone were looking at distributing solutions without having them be localized or, landing in a good context to locations. So there's a bit around that, but I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I have feeling about having regenerative hubs are kind of bubbling up a little bit, although I would love more cohesion around it. And I have a project around that in Portland that I'm excited about, as well as in the Gorge, where it's just about an hour away. And I would love to be strengthening this as like a pattern for networks, for the networks that are emerging. So that's why I am here and why I was giving a little push or encouragement to have this conversation. So happy to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I was really planning and wanting to be a part of that session with Cynthia and everyone, and I just got pretty slammed today and this week. But I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and tuning in on the recording and so forth. Yeah, I guess just to tag on to the idea of cohesion, because that, yeah, coherence, cohesion, it's relevant, and it kind of speaks to what I've been feeling and calling like the dance between centralized and decentralized, or centralized in the sense of having a focus, having a lens, having a vision and a mission that might also be branded and have a particular, you know, business interest or entity and so forth. And then, you know, fully decentralized is sort of like floating in the ether. So, you know, what's the balance or the happy medium? Is another way to frame this space.
One thing that's been coming up for me in response to that particularly is the idea of almost looking at, like, you know, again, in biomimicry, like looking at coral and coral formation and how these are coalitions essentially between organisms. And I think that one of the things that has happened through the development of eco-villages, et cetera, is that a lot of these groups are coherent within themselves and have good allies, but then there's no, but then the allyship isn't fully documented or easy for other people to see from the outside. And sometimes that allyship needs to run into not just like other like-minded villages, but understanding how these people, or understanding what is the way of connecting to food, to water, to et cetera, and calling in those people who would sit just outside of the village in the local geographic periphery, who may actually not be of the same mindset. Because we have a bunch of people who are sort of converted to the experience, but then we have these places cannot remain sort of completely unmoored within their local community, right? Because if they're only connecting to other communities that are like-minded throughout the regions or throughout the globe, but not to their neighbors, that becomes a kind of isolating factor. And I think that both the technology to map it, to map these things, and then also the ability to continue to sort of grow relationships, is dependent a bit on things like currency. It's dependent a bit upon things that help this become tangible for others. You know, I am a big believer in that aspect, that the tribes of the internet cannot be real unless they have sort of assets and things that are, you know, currency is a good asset to be able to share with people. That's comes up for me a lot.
Something there around asset-backed currencies that we've been talking about within the communities movement, and it's one of the bridge conversations around the Commons Engine, the follow chain, and the trajectory of being able to have asset-backed currencies, you know, and they can be backed by the assets in the community. And it's a pretty straightforward way to move into a value-backed economic system, which would stabilize once the other one falls out of the way. But the process of whether we can get the other one out of the way in time, or why there's such a, why it keeps getting held back up again, even though it's it's completely artificial and based on debt and everything. But the part about how to get just to get into the work of doing the asset-backed currency model is exciting. And I think it's the part where, well, within Village Lab, the consulting group that I'm part of, we work with communities of purpose, practice, and place. That's part of how we frame that, because there are a lot of distributed communities that are that have shared purpose or and shared practices, and then there are, of course, communities of place, and the stacking of those, or the reinvigorating those, is kind of a driving ethos there. And just to appreciate your biological, the biophilic reference to the coral and coral growth, that is a really beautiful one to bring in, because I remember having an insight around that because the archaic, like the growth pattern. It's just there's so much to be able to learn from from the rest of our natural larger body. So I appreciate that, bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it came up in this film again on Lynn Margulis. And I don't know, I have to find the link to it. I'm going to share it with both of you. I've mentioned this film before, perhaps it's a bit too long, but if you can divvy it up into pieces, it's a really nice move into her thinking, and also into videos, archival videos. Grab that.
Cool. Well, I'm curious about this Commons engine, and I'm also just reflecting on, I didn't make so many notes to prepare. Mostly it's kind of what I put in my original post, we can come to that. And I also have a kind of seeds of a mind map, which might be fun to play with if we want. But in regard to this currency model that you're talking about, and sort of, currency innovations that are going on, that's resources. And I think I had been thinking more about like learning resources, learning and action resources, informations and tools and platforms and a whole bunch of things. I hadn't really been thinking specifically those resources, but obviously that is included. And so it's quite a broad, again, open space that I'm trying to hold, and anything goes.
Yeah, one logistical point is the notes. There is a template for making notes. I don't have it handy. I was actually going to see if I can find it. But if you have one, or you want to create one, then we can add the resources and things that Mariette is also sharing into that. And I'm happy to help take some notes. One of the other, yeah, is that something?
Well, yeah, I guess I do have. I made a document before Ben sort of reminded me that there was a template, and I have them both. So what I'll do, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'll just send the document that I've started, and if you want to take over, or just we can all sort of tag team.
I think we just all tag team, yeah.
Yeah, so then, so that's what I managed to get in there so far, and you'll see also at the top, somewhere close to the top, the official TRCC document, which is that template, and I think somehow we can kind of coordinate those.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. And then, so the point that I just wanted to bring in as well, from the other conversation, and this is one of the projects that is being born in from the JENA Alliance, is that idea of a distributed land trust. In particular in North America, but to create a distributed land trust project, which of course could lend well to being a place where regenerative hubs would be able to be fostered and have them emerge. There's also a strong desire to make more inclusive, diverse and inclusive spaces, and dealing with that side of things as well. So that's part of our model. And that's actually one of the things that when I look at other examples of hubs, I don't know if you're familiar with the Impact Hub movement. Yeah, so exactly right. So so part of the idea that I got when I was seeing what you were talking about, and what I've been feeling a need for in Portland too, is to create, because Portland's it is a hub in all these other ways, and then there's a lot of regenerative kind of aspects, but how would we kind of really amplify the way that the regenerative culture is able to kind of show up and feed in those spaces? So that feels like a version of that. And Nathan?
Nathan,
hi.
Welcome. Hi.
Thanks.
Great to meet you. Yeah, well, let's see. We can, welcome just to do a bit of a check-in, or Kayala, was that you feeling complete on that point? Or?
Yeah, I just mainly want the idea of the land trust network. popped in here somewhere.
Oh, cool.
And then,
That's a specific thing that it's called Land Trust Network, or what's?
it's a project that we're still. I mean, land trusts are a type of way to hold land. It's a way to It's a legal entity as a land trust. Sorry, I don't mean to be like U.S. centric and ignoring the realities of how complex different types of legal structures exist in different places.
Understood.
But the Global Land Trust project, I think someone posted in the Commons channel also. But the idea of a land trust project that would be able to coordinate with the regen hubs, possibly. That was the idea.
Okay, cool. Oh, great. Leslie, welcome. Hi there. Thanks for joining. Glad you could be here. Great. Yeah. Well, I guess Nathan and then Leslie, you can check in. We welcome you, and yeah, let's hear what perhaps interests you in coming here and what's going on. Yeah.
Hi.
Nathan? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Liz. It's fine. You can go.
Either way, sorry, I thought the call was a little bit later, so I'm hopping in on my phone and just happy to be here. Excited to see what you're up to. I have long Finhorn love connections, and your language sounds like we're kindred spirits. So. My dissertation was on climate change and consciousness, effectively. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, then we should talk some more. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And maybe just something about what you're up to. I mean, after your dissertation, or I don't know.
Okay, sorry. Yes. So I'm the birth mama of the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory. And I co-steward it with Ben Roberts. So we, dreamed up these dialogues that we're in. And I just wrote a Talanoa report to the UN using the lens of TRCC that brings the collaboratory's work into kind of the climate change realm and talks about how raising consciousness is really what's happening in this evolutionary moment in time in our species as what I call Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens means, you're descended from the apes. Homo sapiens means, you're part of an interconnected whole. And that's the evolutionary leap that we're in. So that's the trajectory that brought me here. And I've done global meditations actually with Finhorn, wearing a different hat with a Gaia Field project. I don't know if you've heard about that at all, but we do subtle activism, which is global meditation and prayer ceremonies for social healing and transformation. And that's the heart that all the TRCC works comes from.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
That might have been too much information. But
No. Great. Nathan.
Yeah, so that's a nice context. I'm looking at, well, I'd say I'm 40 years into my dissertation, and I have yet to enroll in a program.
That's okay. It's the journey that counts.
I don't want to slow down by fitting those particular frameworks. So the interface of climate change and climate is very interesting, just as a word, and consciousness. Ultimately, for me at least, it has to be embodied, and then my own body, how it interacts with other bodies, whether they're physical bodies or something more subtle, is the chemistry in those relationships seems to be for me, where I'm choosing to focus. That's kind of on a metabolic route of where this transition or transformation or kind of caterpillar versus butterfly metabolism grounds itself. So I'm looking at very particularly how I can recognize, honor, activate, and engage emerging components of that healthy metabolism in very specific projects. One is the Connecticut has a sustainable Connecticut framework, which is really interesting. It's just been its first year. It has a bronze level and a silver level, but nothing beyond that, which is a good design piece, I think. And it's looking at Connecticut's, one of Connecticut's challenges has been no regionalism. 169 towns that are kind of, duplicating a lot of effort, but we can leapfrog that. And so one of the things in this framework, it's you get points for certain sustainability actions, but it's all municipal action. It's things that cities do in their generally siloed consciousness. But one of those actions is create a new sustainability action that isn't in the Sustainable Connecticut framework and enact it and document it in your town. So I'm going to be working with a town next door to New Haven to create the conversations, the ongoing conversations and learning processes where we can shift from sustainability thinking to thrivability and regenerative thinking as cities, where the really rich citizen activism and grassroots activism learns how to play with the city and vice versa in a more more lifelike way. And so there's a lot in that, but that's where I'm right now, and I see that in the midst of this TRCC conversation about kind of large systems and big places, and large networks, and still a certain amount of necessary, I think, large framework planful thinking. Where does that actually grow up from a piece of soil with water and with people? Where is the same thing emerging? And then how do those two create a dynamic tension that pulls a re-identification into reality? So the city's re-identifying as, we're not after doing a checklist of sustainability actions. We're trying to create the soil in which a thriving community can exist. And then this is a re-identification. And that's where the consciousness and the climate change meet, I think. So I'm here because the title said, yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. I've been, it's been quite a journey. I've been on this climate change and consciousness thing for more than a year, and I don't want to just talk about that or my experience, but I will say I've taken a deep dive into a lot of the languaging and kind of metaphors around not even specific to consciousness, but around the networking, the ecosystem. We were playing with seed metaphors and satellites and different things, and we didn't. And still on the side of the conference and in regard to how is the world going to plug in the form of hubs that's via live streaming, those are a particular kind of hubs that have a more, let's say, maybe concrete or finite type of form. And then outside of those 7 days next April, then it's overlapping in terms of the technology and the plugging in, and also in terms of kind of the themes and the focus, but basically gathering in different centers and communities, homes and so forth, to talk and to maybe go toward collaborating and doing some actions of some kind. And so that's kind of the origin of my inquiry here. Those kind of hubs, like live streaming hubs, that's a different kind of hub than sort of, piece of land with a farmhouse, but that could also serve as that, it could be back and forth, vice versa. A lot of things are coming to mind, and I'm happy just to turn it over to you guys. I appreciate all of that, Nathan. I'm just kind of taking it in. I think there was one session through the TRCC that I sat in on a couple of weeks ago that, no, it wasn't. It was just a kind of peer-related announcement, something relating to municipal work, kind of working on a municipal level. And that's what came to mind. A lot of those. I think actually Daniel Wall was on one of those sessions, for example. And so I've been learning a lot about that stuff lately, and that relates to the bigger picture of where I'm trying to head. But in the meantime, I'm thinking. I've been thinking again more around kind of learning resources and ways to connect in hub clusters, let's say, to kind of facilitate action and collaboration. So that's just again the lens where I've been.
Yeah, there's I've had a discussion, kind of a little bit of brainstorming, but not a lot, with Nora Bates and Michelle Holliday and Ben Roberts. I think Nora's really taken a deep dive into the warm data aspect of things right now, but she did propose something around liminal cities. And the idea that you'd have warm data learning going on in several locations around the world, and then kind of a learning between those hubs.
What's warm data?
Warm data. Warm data is the information in the intercontextuality that we all carry. So around a wicked problem, it's not in the metadata that we're going to find our solutions. It's in the relational data, and how our stories overlap. She has a better way of, she has a more exact way of putting it, but she brings the whole Bateson, battery to helping helping groups see that way together. So it's creating a collective lens rather than a bunch of individual lenses, without going to without atomizing, without reductive thinking.
Just put a 4-minute video there from Nora talking about warm data for a expanded concept. I've been using that term also. I adopted it immediately upon hearing it from her.
I'm loving it too. I think I'm using it.
Oh yeah, it's like a word for what you're already leaning into, right? So
yeah, right.
Warm data from wetware.
For you guys. Oh, hi.
Mariette, you said what?
Warm data from wetware. I mean, that's what we are, right? We're wetware.
I'm thinking about warm data tables.
I mean,
Okay.
I think that warm data for me then, though, becomes the hum that is outside of any particular sort of flow.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Because visually that's where I see it, and that sort of resonant fray is actually not something that one will ever directly quantify. Because it's like trying to quantify every aspect of a whisper network. Good luck, because you also then have to quantify the movement of the bodies within the room and their backstory, etc. And I personally don't plan on ever being so quantified. So, so to meet the biology with the technology is what you're all so brilliantly locating, and it inspires that for me in a way that is really helpful, because that's part of the consciousness shift that we're trying to facilitate, right? It also does make me think, though, back to something Keala was saying just before you both came on too, is in terms of some of these things can get integrated, I think, through an idea of enterprise, conscious enterprise. And, how do you get communities to interact with each other from, let's say, the city to different parts of Connecticut? How do you get all of that to happen? It has to be intergenerational. It has to have lots of different components because different people are not fully aware of the technology at all. Even people who are bathed in it don't really get it because that's not part of the common dialogue. And then there is also that aspect of like I'll put in the notes as well, but there's this organization called BK Rot, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with, but it came up through Food Tank's Food Summit in New York City, which I attended only via live stream. But what's amazing about it is that it's a community-driven compost initiative. And it also empowers at-risk people, people of color, and people from LGBTQIA community. So what essentially you see is something that's based around food, that looks at inclusivity, and looks to develop sort of pathways for empowerment that are against, the normal disempowerment structure flows. And boom, without a lot of talk, without a lot of conversation, it's a gem.
Yeah.
And it grows. And that then is the kind of thing, if you can take people who are underserved within the communities, people who are living also at the food bank level, which is it's an absolute parallel food economy. And if those people become integrated into the restructuring and into the thrivability, that already then becomes an endpoint for people to want to have the conversations, to then come to the workshops, to then share information. Because, that's the thing that we didn't have in the past. And if we want to really go way back, we can look at how farming was shifted and how peasantry was converted into thinking, well, what we do is dumb. So we'll buy all these chemicals from these people and now we'll change how we farm. Yeah. And that's not real. So I love what you're saying, and I just needed to round that out.
Yeah. Some of that shift from parallel to ultimately connecting is happening in New Haven. We have a really vibrant urban food policy council. It's a very citizen-run, very inclusive and diverse, and that BK Rot looks great. We have a local compost Peels on Wheels piece going in one of the people in our bioregional group. But this looks like it's got some other stuff in it, and it sounds like exactly part of what I'm trying to do. So that link by itself is huge. And everything you said about it sounds spot on.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in the corner by myself. So it's nice to get in a call and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense to other people too.
Yeah, light bulb went off for me too.
Yeah,
great. Mutual.
Going back to Nora Bateson, I think it's great to get a little bit of insight into what does this mean, warm data, and I sort of through mutual networks, and I've been in touch with her a little bit, not much, but she sent me I guess a chapter or something that she wrote. It was within the last month, and I didn't really penetrate it. It was pretty long and dense. But it was particular to climate, so that was kind of interesting. She's I guess maybe you know that, or it's out there, but she's definitely focusing a bit on that as well.
Yeah, I may not have seen that one. So just to bring it back to what was relevant in particular was that the particular project we were thinking of was Michelle is in Montreal. Age of Thrivability is her book, and down here in New Haven, those would be two of the liminal cities, and we'd have hub-to-hub tech supported kind of co-conference or co-process that probably one event that would hopefully lead into some kind of an established partnership where there's we have our local learning and then a mutual learning that can thrive on the difference, the space between
as like twin cities kind of a thing.
Yeah,
sister cities. Interesting. Interesting.
Sister liminal cities.
Sister liminal cities. Beautiful. Please give Michelle love. I haven't seen her
Singapore, San Francisco, Montreal, and then we were considering New Haven. We'll call it the Quinnipiac bioregion, just kind of as a step forward into how we want to start seeing things.
Is there any list somewhere of those liminal cities, or it's too sort of still emerging? Or
I'd just Google her liminal city, Nora Bates and liminal cities, and I think she put something out this is probably Googleable.
Nora or Michelle? It's Nora's.
Nora is liminal cities, and Michelle is age of thrivability.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. Got it. Thanks.
Are you regularly in touch with Michelle? Definitely say hi from me as well. We had a chance to connect a couple times.
Now and then, every few weeks. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, the conference in Colorado, the Regenerative Summit there, that's where we had to spend some time, but we'd met in Portland before that. The idea of doing more summits, by the way, and that hubs can host them, and some of the, I'm just going to jump in and share another thought form around something in Portland here it'll be the 20th year or the 19th year coming up of the Village Building Convergence, which is a type of, it's a urban placemaking festival where, natural building and gardens are done around the city, lots of things in the commons or in the public space. So like gardens in the parking strip or libraries on the sidewalk and benches in the public space and that sort of thing. And something that's powerful about that type of pattern for placemaking as a way to gather people is also it's a direct action. It's engaging the space, and it's reclaiming space, but it's also stewarding it, and it's creating regenerative space. So I think a pattern that also makes sense, and this is whether people think of it as like the concept of like barn raising, but village raising or regenerative hub raising, but the process of saying how do we spin up these places by bringing energy together and creating places where the energy can come together. And sometimes it's the way these centers emerge are in response to emergencies. There was The Response, which is the podcast that we were talking about in the last call, and covers some of those stories of types of emergent hubs that come in a time of disaster. And so the idea of creating regenerative hubs preemptively, before disaster is striking, and as a way to, build resilience and resources in those ways. And or you could even take the stance that like disaster is striking already, and that we're, like in those ways, like which I would not argue with. And then since there's a lot of people that are in denial, you can also use the, the preemptive angle too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a diversity and inclusion piece throughout what you were just saying, but part of it's not preemptive. I mean, for some folks, it's been a disaster for a very long time, and we just haven't recognized that and really honored it for what it is.
Welcome to Magenta. I guess that's Magenta, is that right? We see Bloom Network. And
yeah, sorry, I changed my name here.
Hi there, and hi Susan.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
You and Magenta came just at the same time, and yeah, we have a little bit of time. I can go over slightly, but not much more. But I guess you guys are welcome just to keep on it as you like. I can leave it running as far as the recording on my machine. I have somebody coming, and I'll turn off my camera and mic in let's say maybe 20 minutes. But if anyone wants to stay, I don't need to cut it off specifically. And I just wanted to, Nathan, I can shoot you a contact of someone, a good friend of mine who lives actually very close to this Arc 38 of Marriott's, but who commutes to Danbury, who's actually in ed tech and learning design, course design at one of the universities there. I forgot. Maybe there's a big university in Danbury. Anyway, so that could be useful to someone to talk to over there. Yeah. And
Hi, I'm going to have to leave soon too, but hi, Magenta and Susan. Is it okay if I kind of continue the thread of the ongoing conversation? I can kind of bring Magenta and Susan in that way too. We were just talking about the need for kind of place-based hubs And Kayla was talking about how Portland has a 19-year village building convergence where they work on, park benches and gardens that are regenerative places in the community. And that reminded me to bring up the Resilient Hubs initiative that Susan at NorCal Resilience Network and me and Trathan at Daily Acts are doing this Resilient Hubs initiative. That's one of the TRCC stewarded projects. And Susan and I have another strategy circle to look at bringing that program as one of the initiatives into Silicon Valley and amping it up throughout the SF Bay in general. And the idea is exactly the demonstration places that are in neighborhoods, so it becomes part of the fabric of everybody's lives, houses, schools, churches, community gardens. And how do we so I have, first, just to share that information, it's up on the NorCal website, I believe, right, Susan, as an initiative?
Yeah.
And I have an ask of the community to support us in figuring out the best tools that people are using to track, on the ground stuff from a, grassroots citizen level. I am, if anybody doesn't know, I'm Kumu mapping TRCC. So we're looking at our relationships from a, network of networks level, just learning that language. It's a network map now. There's a whole backstory about how we started out systems mapping with Scott Spann, for anybody who knows him. And it just turned out, I still use it, but the whole network needed to develop its capacity and its interest for mapping as a practice. And so we're doing that now, and looking forward to seeing where that goes. But as Nathan was saying, that's relational, conceptual, but we need to land it on the ground in places, and the Kumu geographic capability is just going live. And so I'm interested in hearing who's using what tools to map place-based things and how they like them. Check.
That's great.
Yeah, and just to add, the Resilient Hubs initiative is based on 3 pillars. The first being disaster preparedness and response, and the second one being permaculture sustainability components like, gray water, gardening, etc. And the third being community building. So we are pilot testing. We have pilot tested this initiative at 7 sites across the East Bay, and gotten some funding from the local government for it as well. There's a lot of support and enthusiasm, especially in collaboration with local governments. So it's exciting project. I think that could be replicated for sure around.
A quick note on the mapping. Really excited that you're working with Christina also on the mapping and using Kumu. And I think that we're prototyping ways to have these types of maps be really functional as both network maps, but also system maps, and so that flows can be visible and we can use them for sense making and have them be holonic and connected to each other. And so there's some exciting side of that we also want to be able to make really practical and easy to interact with, which is part of the reason why Kumu is great as a front end for that, because it's easier to interact with the data there. So but excited about that as a function.
I had just a quick kind of question interjection there, because I have a real interest in well, mapping in general, but Kumu I haven't really done, but I've seen some incredible work, mind-blowing stuff, and I have a sense, kind of understanding of the value on the, let's say, on the back end, but in terms of sort of community interface, kind of user experience, I mean, is it really more for the back end, or how does or can it relate, or is that, Leslie, more what you're asking for as far as looking for other tools, maybe for more like community members, or what? I know that's a bunch of stuff, but to try to get a sense, because that's kind of where I'm at this doorway.
Can you just, before I respond, just clarify what you mean by backend?
In regard to data, network data, and working with it, visualizing it, and using it in different ways. I guess that's one of the things that I'm aware of.
So maybe my short answer, we'll see if this helps. There's kind of two things. The first is I've learned that there are mappers, and then there are people who are not mappers, right? There are people who can really live in that world and not, and you know, we're never going to make the mappers non-mappers. So there's kind of like the geek squad of people who are map geeks. We've got 6 of them already within TRCC who are kind of collaborating on this map, including Magenta. Hey, Magenta. She's a map geek. So there's a core group that are pretty much going to have to do the design and interpretation and figuring out the frameworks that and the views that show the useful things. Then there's another level of anybody who's a systems thinker can probably learn to play around with the maps and see the patterns. And then I've been experimenting with how can you use the maps to show patterns that are meaningful to like regular folks. And I actually put links to so we have an overview that's kind of like a movement story map with a couple of views on the TRCC map, and I put links to those and included them in the story in the Teleno report to the UN. So far, early indications are that when regular folks outside the movement look at the maps, they can make sense of the pattern more easily from looking at the map. We just use there's a map of the spaghetti interconnections between the TRCC members that we call the network map. And we just use that in a report that I did to the Threshold Foundation about what we funded in TRC this year. And I said, look, you guys, you know, here's a network of networks at work. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. That's beautiful. You're way ahead of me, and it's perfect. Thank you. And welcome, Lauren. And I guess there was some confusion around the time. We've been going almost an hour, and I'm just to mention, Lauren, and anyone else, you're welcome to hang on, and I'll leave my machine on because I have the recording going into my computer. I'm only going to have about 10 more minutes myself, but I'll just sort of mute and put my camera off, and anyone that wants to hang it, it's fine. Magenta, did you want to share anything? And then Lauren, maybe you can check in for a moment, if you would. Or Lauren, go ahead.
Possibly. I don't really know where we're at in the conversation. I'm working on setting up. So hi everybody. I direct an international. Basically, it's like an in-person social network that uses online tools to support regenerative cultures. So we have local chapters all over the world, and they're connected to lots of different parallel networks, and it's very cross-sector. So it straddles the corporate world a little bit more than most of the networks I've ran into through the TRCC, for example, because we're working on doing kind of industry transformation stuff too. And yeah, there's a few, I guess, structures that we're setting up this year that are relevant to share here. One, I'm putting together a wiki for regenerative solutions. and it's kind of across kind of 7 different topic areas. But that's something I'm doing. I'm looking at what exactly tools to use right now. Charles recommended Federated Wiki, and then we're using a thing called I mean, this is just sort of on the technical side, because that's kind of I'm the director, but I'm also sort of like our back-end engineer, setting up our systems that we use for communication and coordinating, and to serve as almost like a marketing agency for all these things, in a way, because they're kind of still stuck in all these kind of micro niches and subcultures and kind of small communities, and whereas we need to be adopting regenerative practices like a lot more quickly in a lot more places, and people still don't quite have access to the information, and everyone's kind of, there's a lot of duplication and reinventing the wheel that's happening in a lot of places. So how do we better connect things? That's something I've been looking at. So what else? Yeah, we're getting started on this. There's this tool called Profinder it's kind of like a really fancy version of LinkedIn. It's usually used within a very large corporation to match talent and skills across departments for specific product development and research and things like that. But the guys who worked at it, a couple of them started, they're calling it Global Change Collective, and it's gonna be Bloom is the first network in there, I guess, which is interesting because we're like the initial populating like the use cases and stuff in there. But it's let's see, yeah, it's focused around climate change, but also, you know, all the ancillary things that are connected to that and contributing to that, like the social inequality and all sorts of things. So that is basically, you can like type a question like, hey, I'm starting a eco village and I want to know, does anyone here know how I can do carbon sequestration? Or if you're even at like a civic scale and wanting to know some data on that. So their goal is to get like scientists and researchers and you know, people with all kinds of different expertise, so that you can easily find someone who has the experience and then also the bandwidth or interest to help you on your issue. So if you have a gap on your team as you're building something, you can ask about that and self-organize. And it could, like if we have one person in there from regenerative community hubs, like, you know, only if like one person out of 100 people working on a project are in there, then they can ask a question for them, you know. So that is like a resource that we're going to start to have this year if anyone needs that kind of thing. So like one thing I'm curious about is like things.
What was that? Just repeat the last thing. You just garbled the connection.
I guess like one thing I'm interested in is interconnecting the regenerative hubs so that we're supporting each other and that we're drawing support also from other sectors that are able to support, even though they're not like 100% fully creating a like holistic regenerative community.
That's great. Thank you. Lauren, anything to add? This introduction, and as some of us are going to sign off shortly.
No, I'm just going to have to watch the recording because everything is so hectic.
Yeah, understood.
I am so sorry, everyone.
No, it's cool. I'm glad you could make it a little bit, and maybe I mean, maybe show of hands, or does anyone want to say who wants to see a little bit, and how long you have, just to give each other an idea. Anyone, or we can wrap it up shortly if it's me. So
I've got a couple minutes.
I have a few minutes. I'd love,
yeah,
if
I've
someone
got
who's been on the call could provide maybe like a synthesis of what you guys talked about, any conclusions, that would be really, really helpful.
Well, I'm taking the notes, and yeah, I think Kiala, is that the one that I'm working on?
Yep, I just responded because folks who join later don't see the chat. So
very good. Yeah, so I'm typing in furiously here, and I didn't start with the sort of official template TRCC doc, but that's linked at the top of this document, and I think we'll sort of transfer them over and clean them up at some point. If anyone would like to do that, that's really great. I won't have time to do it for about a week, but then yeah, it'll be there. So great. Well, yeah, I think in general, and I wish, you know, Marriott, when we first met, which was pretty recently on one of the ecosystem mapping calls, she had come back from this conference and had been talking about permaculture and soil, and I just was sort of primed with the question around soil in transition, but as a metaphor, kind of. And I think that's really rich, and I haven't really studied permaculture per se. I have a sense of it, and I'm into language and metaphor, but that's another frame, sort of how do we do all this stuff and kind of, you know, get the soil cleaned out and really, yeah, nutrient rich and everything else. So, but I'm excited to connect with all of you more and to kind of go into more of the projects that you're working on.
I'll just say briefly, one of the frameworks and kind of macro projects I'm working on, Charles, which you brought up with the metaphor of soil, is what I call School of Interdependent Living, or soil. And the idea it starts. It's not something that has to be built. It's something that has to be recognized. And then as you recognize it and honor it, then we can activate and engage various practical means of having aggregate the flows of resources around livingness rather than around an extractive. So it already exists everywhere, and it's kind of, whether it's a branding process or, I mean, it's probably a lot of things, but branding would be one piece.
It's great. Maybe? No? Did you hear me?
No.
Oh, Lauren, anything to share on what you're up to?
Well, I'd like to listen to what everyone else is up to, but I'm basically just in favor of small hubs, like salons that connect like mycelium through underground networks and different intelligence configurations. So I'm just on a lookout for hubs that have already been forming, and networks, like international networks that have people in different cities that we can just put into hubs, and just trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's hubs on different scales, right? So the regional, the hub we were just speaking of is on a neighborhood scale, and then we're also looking at hubs on a bioregional scale, you know, like several cities combined. And then there's the hubs on a regional scale, and then national, and then international. So I think it's really important to look at the different levels of scales, and then how can we like connect and collaborate through, you know, whether it's working groups, you know, through the online collaboration, I think is really really key. But in terms of the in-person, you know, that's, I feel like just up to the regional scale, that feels pretty good to me, just to figure out like how can we connect in person. That's what we've been doing, like with the permaculture convergence, like the Northern California convergence is a regional scale.
I like that.
Yeah. So, but I think having working groups that sort of transcend these different levels would be really crucial.
I'd love to chime in with one of the points that was raised before. A lot of the folks came in around the land trust model being incorporated into this idea, just to represent some of the more rooted expressions of the hubs too, because there can be ephemeral expressions of hubs like the types of permaculture gatherings, and or this was in the same part of that. It would be redundant to watching the recording for me to say it again, but I will just for the moment to just say that the building of these regenerative spaces, whether they're on, they're on private land or community held land, or these part of the land trust network, that that practice of getting these places more rooted will be, be really powerful. And then doing the ephemeral projects too.
Yeah, for sure. And having some guide, some basic guiding principles that the hubs are rooted in seems really important as well. Whether it's just the permaculture principles of earth care, fair share, people care. That's what we use. But, bringing in the equity piece and bringing in how can we treat each other and respect each other.
That's beautiful. I was reflecting on some of this. Well, Susan, you were talking about online is really key for connecting and collaborating, and I think maybe as I'm about to sign off, I just consider among the resources for action and for learning are obviously tools and platforms, as we've been in and out touching on. And that online-offline kind of dynamic, and I think relating to the different scales, from neighborhood up to international, but also cutting across. There's face-to-face, or even, I don't know. I'm not sure how to quite to frame the question in a concise way, but I think I was in this session with Otto Scharmer last week. This sort of combination of Transforming Capitalism Lab and ULab, maybe some of you are familiar with, and the kind of merging and heading into the Society Transformation Lab. And one of the takeaways was a guy named Martin, I forgot which country, but he's African and doing a lot of movement building across the continent there. And he basically said the time is now, and that there's no barrier, no effective barrier anymore to connecting and communicating and collaborating online. And that was a kind of similar message from Scharmer and presencing people, that the tools are here, and of course face-to-face is awesome, it's great, but here we are, and we're hopefully doing something of value.
I was just looking at the Capital Institute, their website, and there's a lot of redundancy with what they're doing and what we are doing, and it seems like there's a lot of organizations that are doing kind of similar work, aligned work, and so I'm just curious, how can we acknowledge our organization's doing similar work, but how can we connect and collaborate without saying no, our model is the one that you use.
Totally.
I think that's really important to say, this is not about branding. This is not about one organization. It's okay to have a little bit of redundancy, but let's just acknowledge and honor the work that we're doing and share the best practices that we're using.
Ken, if I can share quickly too, that I think that's the main conversation that we need to have as a movement, is how to break down that siloing effect. And I think a lot of us want to lean into that, and then we still actually need to figure out how to do it. So I see the TRCC, and certainly the dialogues as a space where that's emerging. But maybe we could have a conversation specifically about that, or you guys, those who are involved more, could direct me if there are any circles that are already specific to that. But that felt to me like one of the main things is how that bridge.
Yeah, I'd love to continue that conversation. Our network is, building that sort of decentralized network that honors the different work that organizations are doing. So that's really important to us to have that conversation. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'll just toss in the word ownership and again, branding. I think these are questions also around like repositories and archives and libraries and materials and copyrights and all. It's a big mishmash. And you know, how can we sort of throw a lot of ebooks in a Google folder? You know, really well. We do it, maybe some of us in some ways, but you know, at scale and growing up as an ecosystem. Anyway, I got to roll. Is everyone feeling complete enough? Should I just stop? Is that fine?
Fine with me.
Okay, wonderful.
Fine with me, and I look forward to more conversation with all of you.
Same here.
Sure.
If we don't talk, happy holidays and happy New Year, everybody. Thanks for hosting, Charles. Thanks for being here, everybody. This is great.
Happy solstice. Yeah. The recording, it'll be posted there'll be a link to the document. I'll try to get that together. I'll put the recording tonight so that it's there in the note document. And I'm looking at the 30th of December, which I think is a Sunday. It's sort of an open day for me, kind of later in the day, sort of early West Coast time. And then that following week, more or less the 3rd to the 6th, throw those dates out there. That's our chance before, I guess it all wraps up around the 7th. So I'll email each of you.
All right, let's stay tuned for that.
Okay.
Take care.
Lots of love. All the best.
Okay.
Love.
Bye.
Bye.